Tonight we will be hearing the real-life, spine-chilling paranormal encounter of a handful of our viewers. All our stories have been anonymous. We will bring entertainment and bring real spooky stories to you to enjoy. Stay spooky.
Hi and welcome to Spooky Mystery. I want to thank you all. Thank you for watching my videos, like them, and the subscribers. Someone reached out to me and emailed me her story to share with you all. I had so much fun making it and sharing it. Of course, it wasn't so easy with so many apps to run, only to bring 7 minutes to you. These videos takes time and hard work, but thank you for your patience and support. Now get your popcorn ready for the full story.
Where do I begin? Let's start by giving a bit of a background into my grandparents' lives, leading up to them moving to that house. I can only start from my early years during the time before my grandfather passed away when I was only 9 years old. The time visiting my grandparents is what caused me to be scared of the dark, what's under my bed and in the closet. But the events and stories that was told has been branded in my memory. What happened to me and my family was a very long time ago. My memory is a bit rusty now, but to my best knowledge and short memory, I will do my best to share with you my story. Before I start telling you what happened that terrifying night that left me so scared and terrified of the dark, especially older houses, I will first start with the history and the secret my grandfather had, for you to understand more about that night and that house. My grandparents lived on a farm their entire life as long as I know. I was born during the time my parents lived with them on the farm. My parents were settling into their life as a young couple and lived with my grandparents for a while. My sister was already 2 years old, and she lived with my grandparents before my parents moved in. But I only know little about my family during the time my grandparents lived on the farm. One particular story that my mother told us is when she was around 7 years old. It was about her time growing up on the farm and when her sisters died in a house fire. I suppose my grandparents did not like talking about it. I don't recall them mentioning about that night when their daughters passed away. However, that is another story for another day, but I can't help thinking, what if? My grandfather had a gift to see and hear people whom have passed away or they don't know that they are not alive anymore. What if? Maybe the reason why my grandfather had this gift. What if the trauma from that night have sparked the gift to see and speak with the dead? Losing your daughters in such a tragic accident could cause a lifetime trauma. What if? My grandfather never told anyone about his gift, other than sharing it with us. So many ghost stories, some so terrifying it will give you nightmares. But it was different back in those days. You can imagine if something like that gets out in the open public. The fear of ending up in a mental asylum was real back in those days. I am very glad that people have learned from the past and can now be open-minded. I do not know how my grandparents ended up in that dreadful house, but I do know they lived on the farm long after their daughters passed away. They moved in that house when they were at retirement age. What happened about the farm? That information I don't have. They didn't have much money, and on top of the struggles, they raised and cared for my disabled uncle. I guess things just got too much for them and lost the farm. Moved to a tiny town very far from where we lived. I remember that my father also didn't get along with my grandparents. It took a long time before we saw my grandparents after they moved in that house. I suppose they were happy there. I just remember good times with them. But the house was so haunted, how can anyone be happy there? I remember how scared I was, but my grandfather had a gift to see and speak with them. So maybe everyone was happy with the living arrangements. It's not like my grandparents had the luxury to move. Meeting my grandparent. At around the time when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I can still remember my first time visiting my grandparents. We only visited my grandparents during the school Christmas holidays only once a year, so you can imagine the excitement leading up to the holidays. The best of it all was spending Christmas with my grandparents. Me and my siblings would pack our bags long before our long road trip. I will talk about it to my friends for days leading up to the end of the year. Probably bored them too, but I could not help the excitement to see my grandparents. The night before our trip would be the longest night of my life. It felt like forever. Laying in bed, restless and hardly getting any sleep in. Too excited for the next morning, and counting sheep did not help at all. When I finally fell asleep, the alarm went off. We did our road trip before dawn when it's still so dark out there. But even when you wish you can sleep a little bit longer, I was too excited. Me and my siblings would take pillows with us to sleep in the car. That is the best sleep ever. Sleeping in the car on such a long trip is the best. On our trip to visit my grandparents, we would have many rest stops on the way, stopping at a rest stop to have lunch at a picnic table. Both me and brother couldn't wait anymore to explore after lunch and admired the beautiful scenery. But we were so excited, sleeping in the car helped making a long trip go by fast. Before we know it, we were in the town heading to my grandparents' house. Driving down the road, all the houses looked tiny and old, not like in my neighborhood. I definitely felt a bit uneasy, feeling lost in a strange place. Arriving at their house, we were so eager to get out of the car to stretch our legs. I could not sit still anymore, tired of the long trip. We could not wait to see my grandparents. But getting up to the driveway, I could not help notice the creepy old house. There was definitely an off feeling walking up to the house. My grandparents were waiting at the front porch, but I was distracted by my grandparents. It's been forever since we have last seen them. The house is small and old and smells strange. Many elderly people lived in that town. I suppose that's all my grandparents could afford on their pension. Upon entering the house, I noticed the floors are old and creaking with every step. The smell was strange and uncomfortable. A shiver ran down my spine. In the kitchen was an old coal stove, something I never seen before, with a tiny table. My grandparents didn't have much furniture in their house. The house felt cold and empty. But I was too excited to be worried about any of that. I couldn't wait to tell my grandparents what we all have been up to over the past year. So much to tell. But I was so tired. All the energy was drained out of me. But after we settled in, both me and my brother went to explore before the darkness settled in. After a long day in exploring the property, the backyard was big. My grandparents grown their own vegetables, also had chickens. There was 2 other small buildings on the property. One had coal stored in it. Of course, me and my brother could help ourselves. We just had to touch the strange black rocks. Our hands and cloths got black from the coal. It was getting dark. My mom called us in for dinner while my grandmother getting the table ready. As I entered the back door, I noticed how dark it was inside the house. Upon entering the kitchen, I see everyone sitting by the dining table talking and the light from the candles on the table. Of course, I had questions to why it was so dark and why there was only candles on the table. But my mom requested for us to go wash our hands before I could ask why. My sister grabbing a candle in hand, I was relieved because it was so dark going to the bathroom. We quickly washed our hands and hurried back to the kitchen. It was so fun listening to our grandparents, hearing them laughing and tell stories all night. My parents looked happy. The stories that was told amazed me. I could sit and listen all night. Oh, how happy I felt to be with my grandparents. The only light in the house was the candle sitting at the table, and some light from the coal stove. I gazed at the flames while getting distracted, while the darkness surrounded us. My mind wandering around as I noticed the chill in the air. Too scared to look behind me down the dark hallway. The only heat is the coal stove, and also the candle light. I wondered when the time comes when my parents hushed us to bed. I looked around to see a clock by none on the walls, the empty walls, but hearing a ticking from the grandfather clock at the end of the hall. Not soon after, my father mentioned how late it is, as my brother already fast asleep in my mother's arms. The words I dreaded, "It's time for the kids to go to bed." My sister holding the candle, I made sure to follow her close all the way to the bedroom. Down the hallway, the light flickering from the candle made shadows on the walls. It definitely made me more scared. As we walked past each room, it felt like 1,000 eyes looking at me. So scared to even look in the rooms, I just hold on to my sister's arms as she was 2 years older and a lot braver than me. We got to the bedroom, and I just jumped on the bed. My body felt tired and my eyes sleepy. Surprisingly, the bed was soft, and I was ready to have a good night's sleep. My grandparents soon walked down the hallway with every step the floorboards creaks, but I was so excited to have them tugging us into bed. My grandmother giving us extra kisses goodnight. Soon I drifted off to sleep, my eyes so heavy from a long day. Little did I know the only light on the bedside table that my mother set down before. It's gone now, the only light in the dark is gone as I watched the light disappeared, as my mother walked out of the room, but I was too tired to worry about that. All night I had nightmares, tossing and turning, and finally opened my eyes from the nightmares. I couldn't make out if my eyes was open or not. It was so dark that I couldn't even see my hands in front of me. Fear started to set in. I started to panic, wanted to scream, but too scared to make a sound. Luckily, my sister was in the same bed, so all I could do is holding her tied. In the distance, I can hear my parents and grandparents still talking, the chime from that dreadful clock at the end of hallway. I wondered when they will go to sleep, as I don't want the stillness in the house. Hearing their voices was at some comfort. I put the cover over my head, still clinging onto my sister. I finally fall back to sleep. Another nightmare woke me up, this time in sweat. This time it's quiet, real quiet, not a sound. I realized that I needed to go to the bathroom, but wait, there is no candle, no light. So I thought if I just fall back to sleep, then I don't need to go. But that didn't work. I desperately needed to go. Try to wake my sister up was impossible. Then in the darkness I heard sounds, almost like whispers. They didn't sound like my grandparents or parents. Terrified, I yelled at my sister to wake up. I need to go now in her sleep, muttering at me to go to sleep. I hear the floorboards creaking in the hallway. It was getting closer. I woke my sister again. This time, I yelled louder at her. She finally woke up, asking what was going on. I explained to her that I need to go, but there is something outside our bedroom door, and I am scared. She comforted me and said, there was nobody outside our bedroom. Everyone is asleep. But I need to go. I can't hold it anymore. She then whispering to me, you can't go. There is no toilet in the house. The house is so old it still have the toilet outside. I couldn't believe it. A toilet outside. Who has a toilet outside? So I asked her what to do, if she could come with me. She laughed and said, well, just hold it. I am not going outside in the cold. I was so upset, laying in my pillow, wonder how I can get outside with no light and all by myself. My sister finally agreed to walk with me to my mother's bedroom. So scared of what was under my bed, I was even scared to put my feet down. But my sister was already leaving the room with the candle. I jumped out and ran to her in the darkness. My mom helped us, going to the toilet with the candle and tug us back into bed. Feeling relieved, I fell asleep soon after. The next morning, I could hear my grandmother in the kitchen and my siblings. I got up and felt so refreshed, even after the restless night. I must have slept very deep after going to the toilet. Going to the kitchen, I noticed the house looked so much different during the day than in the darkness. Seeing my grandmother in the kitchen making us breakfast, I gave her a big hug and sat at the table. My mother entered the room and hugged me. She then asked how I slept last night. My sister and brother left to go washed up. I looked at my mother and mentioned a nightmare, and when I was awake to go to the toilet, I could hear voices in the hallway that scared me. I didn't recognize the voices. My mother brushed it off as a nightmare I had. I quickly said no. I even heard the floorboards creaking. The footsteps got closer and stopped at our bedroom door. Thinking my mother would brush it off again, she just looked at my grandmother. They both looked at each other as if they have seen a ghost. Later in the day, we went out with my grandparents to the park. We had a wonderful day as a family. Everyone was in good spirit. By the time we got home, the sun was setting. I had time to explore with my brother before dark. My brother wanted me to play by the big old tree in the front garden. The grass sometimes grows very long at my grandparents', makes a perfect way of playing hide and seek. On my way through the front door, I passed by my grandfather sitting at the front porch. He was reading a newspaper and smoking his pipe. I stopped and gave him a big hug. He asked me what we were up to. So I mentioned that we were going to play by the big old tree. The tree had big rock around the trunk, almost like something was buried there. The tree had branches hanging down, we sometimes swinging from it, playing Tarzan at the weeping willow tree. But when I mentioned the tree, my grandfather looked worried. He said we should not play by the tree when it gets dark. I wanted to know why, but he then asked me about my nightmare. I said that the nightmare was bad, but the noises was worse. I told him even the footsteps in the hallway scared me. I even mentioned the scary grandfather clock in the hallway. He then comforted me and said, "Let me tell you, there is nothing to be scared of. They will not harm you." I looked confused at my grandfather. "What do you mean, grandfather?" I asked. He sighed and in a low voice said to me, "I should not tell you. Your mother will not be happy with me. They noticed that you are scared." I could tell my grandfather tried really hard not to say much. He turned to me and said, "They don't know that they dead. Some lost their lives too soon and lashes out, but I know how to talk to them." My eyes wide open, looking at my grandfather with fear. He hugged me and comforted me. Whisper in my ear, "It's our secret, don't tell your mother." I agreed. In shock, I left to join my brother. But then my grandfather said to me, as I walked off, "Promise not to play at that tree after dark." I couldn't believe what just happened. I turned and said, "Yes, grandfather." Both me and my brother sat on the rocks talking. I told my brother all about what happened and what my grandfather told me. I had so many questions and know to only one who believes me is my grandfather and brother. We both agree to keep it to ourselves as my parents would probably not believe us. We noticed the sun going down and would want to stay at the tree too long and hurried back inside. Soon as the sun set, we run into the house. Dinner was already on the table. Both me and my brother washed up and run to the kitchen. The atmosphere is strange between my parents and grandparents. Notice my sister had red eyes, like she cried. That's when I remembered that I haven't seen much of my sister all day. The last time was at the park, but she was quiet. During dinner, everyone had small talk and less laughter. My grandfather left early to read his newspaper. I went to wash up to get ready for bed. There was no electricity, so no TV and not much to do. Reading books or playing on the bed with my sister is all we could do. But my sister wasn't in any mood to play or read with me. She just laid there in bed. I was started to wonder what is going on here. After a while, trying to get my sister to tell me what is going on with her, she turned around and said, "There is something wrong with this house." Shocked, I said to her that I have the same feeling too. She said that she too heard the noises and whispers. She said that she saw a woman by the tree through the window the night before. No one wanted to believe her, and it caused arguments between our parent and grandparents. I went on telling her about the things our grandfather said to me. We both looked at each other and said at the same time, "We need to talk with our grandfather, he would believe us." We agreed to talk to our grandfather when my parents aren't around the next day. Soon after, my parents walked in to say goodnight, and then our grandparents. This time, my grandfather left a candle in the room and gave us a big kiss on our forehead. We both laid there holding each other until we fell asleep. A big bang woke me up, with my sister shaking me and whispered to me, "Wake up, wake up." That's then when we heard a deep man's voice and loud footsteps. Our room was at the end of the hall, opposite the lounge, facing the front yard with the big tree. The floorboards creaking with every step as it getting closer. The door handle rattles, we just want to scream, and then the door opened. I could feel my body cold as ice, holding my sister so tight and staring into the darkness. My sister picked up the candle to see better towards the door. Then the floor started creaking, and around the corner appeared two boots walking past the doorway. The front door opened, and we can still hear the boots going out the door. I couldn't believe my eyes what I just seen. Two boots with no body, nothing. But then we heard a scream from a woman. My sister walked towards the window. I tried to stop her, but I couldn't speak. I was frozen with fear. Then I heard a woman crying and whimpering. I got up and walked slowly with my sister. Both of us holding each other, shaking, walked towards the window. The moon was full and we can see the tree, but carefully keep distance. We didn't know where the boots was, only that it went through the front door. Then a snap sound and bones breaking. I jumped, and then I saw her, a figure of woman hanging from one of the branches. I could see her eyes. That's when two hands slammed the window close in front of us. You can still the hand prints on the window. That when we fall back and both screaming, our parents rushed in and my grandparents soon after. Trying to explain both, all we did is crying. I didn't want to open my eyes. Everyone yelled at each other, so much noises and fights. We finally fell asleep in my mother's bed while I could hear my grandparents in their room. The next day, my parents packed up and we headed home. Saying goodbye was the hardest thing. Watching my grandparents so sad that we didn't spend much time with them. Later, after my grandfather passed, my grandmother told us all about my grandfather. The story is about the man who murdered his wife and hanging her in that tree. My grandfather could speak with the dead and keep them calm. He left the boots locked up in a wooden cabinet, but the boots will leave the cabinet and walked down the hall, just like the night he hanged her that night. My grandfather tried to help them move on, but I suppose not all ghosts want to. And they relive that awful night, looking for revenge. I am so glad we have never seen that house again. Thank you.